You don't really understand what danger feels like until you see three grown men creeping toward your pond at midnight with fertilizer bags big enough to poison half a county. No headlights, no talking, just those shaky flashlights weaving through the brush like guilty fireflies. That's how my story begins. Not with neighbors, not with courtesy, but with trespassers dressed in matching powder blue HOA shirts who thought they could use the dark to erase a boundary line my family has guarded for 70 years. Where are you watching from today? I was sitting on my porch in my old rock. Same place my grandfather sat. Same boards my father repaired after the big storm in '89. The night was quiet, the kind of thick Texas quiet where every small sound climbs right into your bones. Crickets humming, wind resting. But then the silence broke. Bootsteps. Soft, deliberate, wrong. I eased up, grabbed my grandfather's shotgun. Eleanor, older than the HOA, older than half the problems in the world, and slipped toward the switch that controlled the floodlights. I let their whispers drift over to me first. Just dump it and go. EPA sees this? He's done. That did it. That slow, old anger that only wakes up when a man's land is threatened rose straight through me. I flipped the lights. Daylight exploded across the pond. Those three men froze instantly. One dropped his bag. The powdered chemicals burst out in a cloud that briefly looked like snow on a hot Texas night. Their eyes went wide, their faces pale, and all three looked like cowboys caught trying to steal horses in a town where that still gets you shot. "Evening, gentlemen," I said, stepping out with Eleanor cradled in my hands. "This isn't HOA property, and that," I pointed at the spilled chemicals, "sure as hell isn't landscaping material." One tried to speak. Failed. Another swallowed hard. The third closed his eyes like he was begging the darkness to take him back, but the fight didn't start that night. No, this war began months earlier, long before the fertilizer and the trespassing, back when a pair of strangers wearing clean shoes and fake smiles stepped over a fence my grandfather built by hand. People who don't work land don't understand it. To them, it's a plot number, an appraisal, a future shopping center. To me, it's memory. It's inheritance, soil and sweat mixed across generations. My earliest memory is walking behind my grandfather while he planted cedar posts, him saying, "Walk steady. The land don't like shaky hands." My father taught me the rest. How a fence line isn't a suggestion, it's a promise. How a man's word should stay straighter than the wire he stretches. How land isn't something you own, it's something you protect until it passes to the next hands that deserve it. So when Sage Hollow Estates popped up on the south side, a perfect little copy-paste neighborhood full of HOA rules and people afraid of dirt, I stayed quiet. Their land, their rules, didn't bother me. All I asked was they stay on their side of the fence. But people who live behind gates start thinking the world should match the color of their shutters. And one Sunday morning, two of them crossed onto my property. A woman in a cream blazer carrying a clipboard like a badge, and a tall man with that polite smile people wear right before saying something irritating. "Morning, Mr. Ward," she chirped. "We're from the Sage Hollow Welcome Committee." I stared back. I didn't join anything. She tried to laugh it off. The man cleared his throat and said, "We're looking to keep the area cohesive. Mutual standards help with property value alignment." Property, value, alignment. Words that mean nothing to a man who was raised mending fences before dawn. She flipped her clipboard open. "We're proposing uniform fence coloration, livestock visibility guidelines, and mowing standards." I let the silence sit long enough that even the man's fake smile sagged. "You're standing on my land," I said finally. She blinked. "Well, technically, the map says. I know my fence line. My granddad set it in '54. My father rebuilt it. I've walked it every month for 30 years. That line stays where it is. Your rules stay where you are." The man tried to salvage the moment. "We'll be in touch." From your side of the fence, I reminded them. But the thing about people drunk on authority, they don't retreat, they reorganize. First came the drone, hovering over my pasture with a steadiness that said someone was steering it like they meant business. One rock tossed in the right direction sent it wobbling back toward Sage Hollow. Then came the people with cameras, snapping pictures of my barn, my windmill, my cattle, whispering phrases like non-standard aesthetic balance. My father would have laughed so hard he'd choke on his coffee. Then came the first fake complaint. No address, no name, claiming my cattle had an odor issue. If cows smelling like cows is a crime, half of Texas would be in prison. The county inspectors arrived next. 2 men in khaki uniforms cleaner than lab coats. We received a report of potential animal neglect, one said. I offered to let them meet my cattle, who genuinely do eat better than most HOA board members. They didn't laugh. They poked around, found nothing, and left irritated. But the pattern had started. More inspectors. More concerns. More county vehicles creeping along my fence line like shy thieves. Someone even dumped construction trash on my land in the dead of night, then tried to accuse me of creating an unauthorized dump site. That trick ended fast when I pointed out the trail camera aimed right at the gate. You learn things living on land this long. Coyotes circle before they strike. Bureaucrats do the same. Then came the man in the polished silver SUV. He introduced himself as Brian Lee, representing a land investment group out of Austin. He offered me a number big enough to make bankers faint. I didn't even look twice. Everything has a price, he said. Not this, I answered. He left too fast, too smooth. That bothered me. Men who expect a fight don't leave quietly, they leave with backup plans. That night I checked my cameras. Sure enough, 3 days earlier, Brian was caught shaking hands with the very same woman from the Sage Hollow Welcome Committee. Exchanging envelopes. That was the moment the storm moved from the horizon to my doorstep. Then came the night my east gate was cut clean open, 12 cattle missing. Tractor tires slashed, my irrigation controls smashed with a hammer. They weren't hinting anymore, they were pushing. Hard, until finally I wasn't angry, I was ready. Ready enough to set a trap. I dug 2 shallow trenches in the south pasture, filled them loosely again, and placed an old hazardous waste sign between them. Fresh dirt is irresistible to nosy people. Sure enough, 2 HOA security officers crept over the fence at midnight with little shovels, whispering about finding evidence to use against me. I let them dig until they were sweating through their uniforms. Then I lit up the floodlights. They froze like grave robbers caught with shovels in hand. I got it all on camera. Trespassing, digging, damaging property. They bolted. Good. Let them run scared. Because trouble with people like them doesn't come from the strong. It comes from the weak, those pushed too far. And I didn't know it yet, but one of them was about to call me. A man named Evan Grant, the HOA's frayed knot. The one thread in their organization that, once pulled, would unravel everything they'd tried to build against me. And when he finally told me the truth, that recording, that plan, that threat, it changed everything. Because that was the moment I stopped defending my land and started fighting back. When Evan Grant finally called me, the whole fight shifted. Not because he was important, not because he held some special authority, but because he was the one thing that destroys an HOA more effectively than lawsuits or floodlights, a frightened man who's been pushed too far. His voice shook like someone calling from the edge of a cliff. He didn't introduce himself right away, didn't try small talk. Just whispered, "Mr. Ward, I need to talk to you." Away from them. I asked him who them meant even though I already knew. His answer was a single word filled with the kind of fear only bullies can create. The HOA. He said Karen's name like men say, rattlesnake, quiet, careful, never more than necessary. And then he started talking, spilling out weeks of frustration in a single breath. How she fined him for grass half an inch too tall. How she doubled his fines when he complained. How she threatened to financially collapse him if he ever challenged her authority again. Each word cracked like a branch under too much weight. When he finally paused, he asked me something I didn't expect. "Mr. Ward, is she doing the same thing to you?" I didn't say yes. I didn't need to. Silence told him more truth than any words could. Then he said the sentence that made the entire land feel still around me. "I have something you need to hear." There was static on the line, a click, a soft shuffle, then a recording. At first it sounded muffled, like a meeting room with a cheap microphone. Then a voice emerged, sharp, calm, cold. Karen Steedman, speaking like someone who believed no one important would ever hear her. "If he won't sell," she said, "we'll make him leave. Dump trash. Call inspectors. Keep the pressure on him. And if the EPA gets involved, even better. Fertilizer, chemicals, whatever it takes. Once he's gone, the land becomes vulnerable. We annex, rezone, develop. He can fight it if he wants. He'll lose." I didn't breathe for a long moment. Her voice kept going, describing the plan step by step, each line more arrogant than the last, like she thought intimidation was some kind of sport. When the audio finally clicked off, Evan's voice returned, quiet, scared, but stronger than before. "I couldn't let her do that to you," he said. "Or to us. The neighborhood, she's been lying. She said your ranch was already under acquisition. She said the county was forcing a buyout. She told us you were the problem, but she's the one creating all the complaints. All the pressure. People are turning against her. I told him he'd risked a lot calling me." He let out a tired laugh. "She fined me this morning for having an emotionally unwelcoming mailbox. Emotionally unwelcoming. I can't live like this." That's when I knew the HOA had cracked. Not because they broke a rule or crossed a fence, but because they broke the wrong man's patience. Before he hung up, Evan said, "I'm sending the recording. Use it. Just don't let her find out it was me." I promised. A real promise, not the polished kind people in HOAs hide behind. When I got off the phone, I didn't feel anger anymore. What I felt was purpose, steady, cold, deliberate. My father used to say, "A man doesn't need to shout when the truth is louder than him." That was exactly what I had now. Truth. Evidence. A voice that didn't belong to me or the land, but to the person who orchestrated the entire war. I printed the transcript, slid it into the binder I'd started building, and labeled the page with the only words that mattered. Part A, confession. Then I checked every camera, every sensor, every light. The ranch glowed with red blinking dots in the darkness, a constellation of patience and preparation. And that night, I called Sheriff Avery. He didn't ask questions, just told me to bring everything to him in the morning. "And Jed," he said, "keep your lights on tonight." "Always do," I answered. Sleep didn't come easy. Barely an hour passed before the air shifted. You can work land for decades and still be caught off guard by how loud silence can become when danger moves through it. Something pulled me awake at 2:17 a.m. Not a sound, not a flash, just a weight in the air. I slipped outside barefoot, shotgun resting in my hands. The night breeze had stopped. Even the crickets held their breath. Then I heard it. Boots pressing into soft soil near the pond. 3 silhouettes moving fast, carrying the same white fertilizer sacks I'd seen before. This time, they weren't sneaking. They were finishing the job. I raised the remote in my hand, whispered, "Let's end this," and hit the switch. Floodlights crashed across the pond like thunder made of light. 3 men froze instantly. One dropped his sack. Another tried to bolt. The third muttered, "Aw, hell, he set us up." But I didn't move fast. I didn't need to. I walked forward slow, boots steady on the dirt, shotgun held low but clear. "Set the bags down," I said quietly. "Gentle. Sheriff's on the way." And right on cue, Deputy Ruiz's cruiser turned the corner, sirens off, just lights rolling across the fields. She stepped out with the calm authority of someone who didn't need volume to command fear. They didn't resist. They didn't argue. They knew. She cuffed them one by one, tagging the bags, shaking her head. "This is felony-level contamination," she said. "EPA is going to have a long morning." Good. It was time someone besides me understood what had been happening here. By sunrise, the ranch didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like a courthouse with open sky. Sheriff Avery arrived just as the streaks of orange touched the pasture. He went straight to the evidence, ran his finger along the fertilizer bag, and let out a slow breath. "Jed, this just went from petty to federal. Inside the kitchen, we spread everything out. Photos, videos, timestamps, drone footage, trespass logs, tire-slashing evidence, the recording, all of it." Avery listened to Karen's voice like a man reading a verdict he already suspected. When it ended, he closed the laptop and said, "She's done." But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Around noon, Evan called again. His whisper was gone, replaced by a new tone, something close to resolve. The HOA had called an emergency meeting. Voices were raised, fines were questioned. People were demanding answers. And then he said, "They want to testify." "A lot of us." She lied to everyone. I could almost hear Sage Hollow cracking from the inside. I thanked him, but before I hung up, he added one more detail. "She fined me again this morning. $200. Said my mailbox was emotionally hostile. I think she's losing it." He was right. Because by evening, the news alerts started popping up. "Turn on Channel 6, one text said. "Karen's losing her mind." So I turned on the TV. And there she was, standing in front of the HOA clubhouse, cameras flashing all around her, her voice breaking into furious pieces. She was yelling at reporters, at residents, at Avery, at anyone within shouting distance. She called me dangerous. She called the sheriff corrupt. She called the community ungrateful. Avery just stood there, arms crossed, waiting for her to burn herself down. "You're being charged," he finally said, "with conspiracy, attempted environmental tampering, and coordinated property interference." She ripped the warrant in half on live television. Then a board member stepped forward, Stuart Langston, and said, "Karen, nobody approved this." She spun, screamed at him, "You don't approve anything unless I tell you to." Everyone heard it. Everyone saw it. And like a crack down the spine of a collapsing dam, the entire community felt the truth break open at once. Then Evan stepped forward, holding the transcript I'd given Avery. His voice didn't shake this time. "I heard you threaten us. I heard you threaten Mr. Ward. I'm done being silent." She lunged at him. Deputies grabbed her. Cameras exploded in flashes. Her empire fell apart, not in a courtroom, but in front of the very people she tried to rule by fear. When they finally put her in the cruiser, I turned off the TV. Justice had already played out. I stepped outside onto my porch, breathing in the familiar smell of dust and cedar. For the first time in months, there were no drones overhead, no strange cars on the ridge, no inspectors crawling around like ants on a sugar spill, just my land, standing exactly where it always had. The morning after Karen's arrest carried a different kind of quiet. Not the tense silence that had hung over my land for months, but something deeper, calmer, almost like the ground itself had finally unclenched its jaw. I stepped onto the porch with a cup of coffee in hand and listened to the wind drift across the pasture. For the first time in a long time, it sounded like home again, not a battlefield. The sun was just lifting over the cedar line when my phone buzzed. Sheriff Avery. His voice was steady, the same voice that had pulled me out of trouble as a teenager and handed me warnings like a father hands out lessons. "We're processing charges," he said. "DA wants everything you have. EPA's sending a team." And Jed, this is bigger than we thought. I didn't answer right away. Bigger wasn't surprising. When someone moves this much dirt, they don't do it alone. Avery continued. "We found emails, paper trails, financial records. She wasn't just harassing you. She was trying to take half the county. Your land was the crown jewel." I stared across my property. the fences stretching out to horizons older than me. "She picked the wrong jewel," I said. Avery chuckled under his breath. "That she did." He told me to head into town around noon to finalize statements. Before hanging up, he added something that made me pause. "It's not just the charges. The HOA board is dissolving. People are resigning in groups, and they're requesting a meeting with you." I didn't give him an answer. I wasn't sure I had one yet. By mid-morning, trucks started rolling slowly past the fence. Not inspectors, not drones. Neighbors, actual human beings. People I'd barely seen before except from a distance when their SUVs crept past the ridge like timid animals sniffing around unfamiliar ground. But now, they drove slower, windows down, some even stopping just to wave. A few shouted thank yous, some apologized. One older man, wearing suspenders and a baseball cap that had seen better years, climbed out of his pickup and called out from the road. "Son," he said, "I'm sorry we let that woman run wild. We didn't know what she was doing." I nodded, not holding it against him. People fall for confidence all the time, especially when it comes dressed in polish and rules. He took off his cap, rubbed the back of his neck. "A few of us want to help repair your gate. Least we can do after everything." That offer caught me off guard. It wasn't the help itself. It was the humility. The kind that comes when people see a truth big enough to reshape the ground they stand on. "Come by this afternoon," I told him. "We'll get it done together." He smiled, climbed back into his truck, and drove off. And for the first time, Sage Hollow didn't look like a threat. It looked like a neighborhood waking up from a long, strange dream. At noon, I drove into town. The sheriff's office was buzzing like a kicked beehive, officers carrying folders, prosecutors drafting warrants, EPA agents unloading equipment like surgeons prepping for an operation. And in the middle of it all, Sheriff Avery stood with his hat tucked under one arm, waving me into his office. We went through everything, page by page. The drone footage, the sabotage, the trespassing, the slashed tires, the fertilizer, the recording. Every piece of evidence was another beam in the structure they were building. A case not just against Karen, but against everyone who helped her. When we finished, Avery leaned back, eyes heavy but satisfied. "Jed, she's going away for a long time. And the ones she sent onto your land? They're cooperating. They're already naming names." He paused, letting that settle. "You handled this the right way. Most folks would have fired a warning shot or two." I smiled faintly. "Wasn't my first instinct." He grinned. "But it was the right instinct." Before I left, Avery handed me a sealed envelope from Evan. He dropped it off this morning. Inside was a handwritten note. Simple. Honest. "Thank you for standing your ground. You didn't just protect your land. You freed ours." There was a second page. Signatures. Dozens of them. Residents of Sage Hollow. People I'd never exchanged more than a glare or silence with. They wrote apologies, gratitude, relief, and one message repeated over and over: "We finally see the truth." I folded the papers carefully and headed back home. By the time I reached the ranch, that small group of neighbors was waiting near the broken gate. The old man from earlier stepped forward with a pair of new chains slung over his shoulder. I didn't give any speeches. Didn't want any. We just got to work. Hammering, tightening, lifting the gate back into place. It felt almost surreal to have hands other than mine working this land. Hands that weren't here to take or measure or sabotage, but to repair. When we finished, the gate stood straighter than it had in years. As they packed up, the old man clapped me on the shoulder. "You're a good neighbor," he said. "Sorry it took us so long to be one, too." They drove off, leaving the sound of gratitude lingering like dust in warm air. The EPA team arrived shortly after. They tested the pond, checked the soil, confirmed what I already knew: no contamination had reached the water. The wind had saved me. Or maybe luck, or maybe the land just wasn't willing to carry someone else's poison. One of the agents, a young woman with sunburned cheeks and a sharp mind, walked over to me. "Mr. Toomey." "Ward," she said, "you documented everything perfectly. Most people don't take warnings seriously until it's too late." "You did?" I nodded. "Had a lot of practice." She smiled. "We'll prosecute this. Count on it." As their trucks pulled away, I felt something shift in my chest. A weight lifting, yes, but not because the fight was over, because I realized I hadn't been fighting alone, not really. The land had stood with me. Sheriff Avery had stood with me. Evan, those neighbors. Even the evidence itself had stood on my side, louder than any threat. The sun dipped low across the fields. I walked out to the pond, the same way I had so many nights before. The surface glowed gold, smooth as glass. Dragonflies skimmed along the edges. The world didn't feel hostile anymore. It felt like it had forgiven the mess and settled back into its old rhythm. I stood there until the light faded entirely behind the ridge, until the only sound left was the wind weaving through the cedar limbs. Then my phone buzzed again. "Avery, all charges filed," he said. "Board has dissolved. HOA's getting a state-appointed caretaker until the neighborhood restructures legally. They want to meet with you. And Jed, they want you to help write new rules." That made me laugh out loud. "Me? Write HOA rules? You don't need to decide today," he said. "Just know they're coming from a place of respect now. Real respect." I told him I'd think about it. And I meant it, not because I wanted influence, but because maybe, for the first time, they were asking instead of demanding. That alone was worth considering. When I hung up, the stars were blinking awake across the dark. I leaned on the same fence post my father once leaned against, and his father before him, and I let the night wrap around me like something that had been waiting to return. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet after the storm. Sometimes it's a gate repaired by the hands of people who once judged you. Sometimes it's a pond untouched because fate stepped between you and the wrong kind of chemicals. And sometimes it's just a man standing on land that tried to be taken and wasn't. This fight started with trespassers and fertilizer. It ended with truth and accountability. Not because I was stronger, but because the land was worth defending, and I defended it the right way. So if you're listening to this story, if you've made it all the way to the end, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button, tap the like, and share this story with someone who loves justice done the honest way. More stories are coming, and you don't want to miss what's next.